Inside New Orleans Sports with Eric Asher is underwritten by...
At Villere's Florist, we deliver the magic of flowers 7 days a week to the North Shore and South Shore in the New Orleans area. Whether it's for birthday parties, baby celebrations, Villere's provides colorful floral displays for all. With a store full of fresh-cut flowers, exotic tropical flowers, orchids, roses, and even fruit baskets, our goal is to make your vision a reality. Villere's Florist, proudly serving Louisiana since 1969. Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House has been shucking here since 1979. Located at 3117 21st Street in Metairie, Mr. Ed's Oyster Bar and Fish House offers raw, fried, and grilled oysters, as well as a range of Cajun and Creole dishes. Enjoy a dozen with a smile.
Good evening and welcome to another edition of Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Asher. We are live from our Pontchartrain Production Studios and, of course, ready for another look at all the home teams, the New Orleans Saints, the LSU Tigers, the Tulane Green Wave, and the New Orleans Pelicans. As always, a great panel to break it down from CrescentCitySports.com and so much more. We have Jude Young and also Les East. Gentlemen, welcome back to the show. Always good to have you. I was telling you guys before the show, actually I told my radio audience today as well, I love having you guys as a tandem. So much great knowledge. I love that you guys really work well together, and glad you guys are back.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Why don't we start off talking a little bit about what you guys are involved in. I heard Jude's going to be on a plane tomorrow, so actually he'll be in, is that Hawaii?
That's right, Honolulu. UNO basketball playing there on Sunday, so we get there a few days early. I don't know why. Why would you want to get to Hawaii early?
Right.
But we'll try to take advantage of that time, and of course that's just one of the many things I'm busy with, including CrescentCitySports.com, where we're awfully busy this time of year for high school football playoff season. We have a live game again on Friday night, I should say, and the best scoreboard in the state, so keep that in mind. And as well, I have a radio show on Nash Icon 106.1 FM every Tuesday night this time of the year. I'll have more time, obviously, once basketball season is over to have more shows, but Ken Trahan and I host an hour every 7 o'clock hour on weeknights, again on Nash Icon 106.1.
Sounds good. Welcome back, Les. Let's let the folks know what you're involved in. You're stringing for a lot of different publications.
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I'm glad you kept the team together. We kind of think of ourselves as like the Joe Brady and Steve Ensminger of the show.
Which is which, though?
Viewers can figure that out for themselves. But yeah, I'm writing for CrescentCitySports.com, of course, and covering LSU for SaturdayDownSouth.com. Also covering the Saints and the Pelicans for the Daily Iberian in New Iberia, and doing some stuff for the Advocate as well, and as well as helping out on Friday nights with the Prep Football radio show.
Over at my buddy Scott Craig's place, right? Francesca, right?
In the regular season we were there. It was excellent. Playoffs, we move into the studio. Brown and I, and Ken goes out and does a game within the show. So we'll have a live broadcast as well as updates from all around the state this week.
Sounds good. Well, legendary Roe Brown. Nothing wrong with that. There you go. Guys, let's start with the Saints after laying the proverbial egg against the Atlanta Falcons. Again, well documented on this program, my radio show, I felt about that, from the coaching staff to the leadership and not preparing and being ready for that game. They bounced back. They're now 8-2, 34-17 winners over Tampa Bay. I'd like to get your thoughts, but I'd like to first thought about the defense, because with Marshawn Lattimore out, obviously a lot of people, myself included, were worried about the back end of the Saints defense. I thought Dennis Allen came up with a really good scheme to keep Winston under duress for really all the game. And the secondary came through with turnovers. Defense played very, very well. Nick Easton comes in on offense, coming for Andres Pete. We haven't seen him all year long. And the offensive line did miss a beat. I keyed in on him when I went back and looked at the game a second time. I thought he played very, very well also. Why don't you take it first, Jude? Why don't we start with defense?
Well, defense, I think, in that situation without Lattimore was the biggest question mark going in because of how potent Tampa's passing game is. But like you mentioned, Dennis Allen and that defense in general on all three levels, they were ready to play. And they knew they had a quarterback in Jameis Winston that if you made them work the ball down the field, Winston and the Bucs would eventually make mistakes. And that clearly happened with all of the turnovers. So credit there. And like you said, the big storyline of the week was, do we see a new Saints, a Saints team we have to worry about after the bye, or are they going to get their acts together? Well, we saw in one NFC South game that Atlanta may suddenly be for real. They may have gotten their acts together big time. They blew out Carolina on the road, and we saw a Saints team that was back to their pre-bye week tricks and playing very well. And again, they're good enough up front with depth as well to rush the passer. Demario Davis leads an outstanding linebacking core that we didn't think was going to be this good and this reliable. And again, in the secondary, when you've got that much going on good in front of you, if you can't take advantage of it and do your job, and now, like, if we could see them come up with turnovers against less turnover-prone quarterbacks than Winston, even better. But if they couldn't get their job done in that situation, it was never going to happen. So kudos to everybody involved on that side of the ball.
Les, your thoughts on the defense? So what, Doug? 2 sacks, 12 quarterback pressures, constant hurrying of Winston. He had no time to throw the ball.
No, he didn't. And the 2 sacks really doesn't tell the story because he was under duress the whole game. And as Jude pointed out, he's prone to make mistakes when he's under a lot of pressure like that, and the Saints took advantage of it. Other than a few penalties on the back end, it was outstanding by the whole defense. I agree. Dennis Allen did a nice job, had a good plan in place. They had the pass rush. They stopped the run. Tampa Bay abandoned the run after a while, which kept those numbers down even more. But the turnovers were the key to the game. You get 4 interceptions, you're going to win almost any game you're in, and they just did a great job. And I thought that's a very good receiving core led by Mike Evans, and not having Marshawn Lattimore, who has had some good battles with Evans over the years. I think to go ahead and contain those receivers as well as they did was very impressive. Eli Apple, P.J. Williams, and the whole secondary really did a good job.
No, they really did. Statistic-wise, Tampa only ran the ball 8 times for 36 yards. We mentioned the sacks and the quarterback hits, but also, again, Godwin and Evans, 7 catches on 14 targets, 116 yards, and a touchdown. And that was my biggest fear going into this game, the ability for those 2 guys to get off against the secondary. Give a lot of credit to the defensive line for dominating up front, where Winston had really no time to even go through his progressions, much less find one of his top 2 receivers.
And that's why you give credit to the offense for coming to play early and putting scoring drives together, because you made Tampa panic a bit and give up the running game and allowed yourself to up front pin your ears back and really get after Winston. So it was a true team effort. The Saints were good in all 3 phases of the game. But again, what was mentioned before about penalties here and there from the secondary. You've got to be physical sometimes. You've got to put your hands on receivers. You've got to throw them off their routes to throw a passing game off. The Saints were able to balance that out really well, and we know how good they can be when they can simply put enough pressure to push the pocket in the quarterback's face. Mobile guys like Winston, we saw it early in the game, at least against Russell Wilson way back in the Seattle game. Those type of guys, simply make them throw from the pocket under pressure, and good things can happen. So we know how good this defense can be when they make a game plan work from front to back that way.
Yeah, and you mentioned the penalties. 9 penalties for 76 yards, but cost the Saints a 3rd down conversion, cost the Saints a touchdown as well.
Yeah, and but I think Jude makes a good point in that some of those penalties on the back end were acceptable because of the way you had to play, and stuff like that's going to happen. Certainly, the penalties were not as big an issue as they were against the Falcons the previous week when they had all of those hands to the face penalties and 6 first downs they gave them with penalties. So I think that was pretty much acceptable. But getting back to the pass rush, I just don't know if we fully appreciate how good Cameron Jordan is. I mean, he is just one of the best defensive linemen in the NFL. He's getting close to his career high in sacks. This is a guy who's been selected to multiple Pro Bowls, and he's probably going to surpass his career high in sacks by a significant margin. He just gets better and better, and having Marcus Davenport and Trey Hendrickson on the other side helping out, and the way Dennis Allen has dialed up some blitzes has helped as well. But he's just a really good player, one of the best defensive linemen they've ever had.
And to your point, when you say one of the best defensive linemen ever, he's ready to overtake Wayne Martin in terms of the second overall in team lead in sacks, behind only, again, the Hall of Famer Ricky Jackson.
Right, Wayne Martin played a chunk of his years with the Dome Patrol and Ricky Jackson and company, so that was such a potent front seven back in the day. Now the Saints aren't in that territory, but they're very good up front, and that's allowing Cam Jordan to get more one-on-one matchups and be able to show his true talent, which is he's not a one-trick pony either. He's not what you would call a Michael Strahan level pass rusher, but I would say he's even better against the run because we're comparing strong side defensive ends. Jordan is simply the type of player that you can put in any role. You can move him inside on pass downs. He can do everything for you, and that allows you to match up. And the bigger picture is, I mentioned Demario Davis earlier, when this defense is fully healthy, they have at least one truly elite player on each level of the defense, and that you have to have in order to be one of the best in the league. Talking about Lattimore in the back as well. When all three of those guys are on the field, you expect this defense to be successful. When one of them's gone and they're still able to be this good, that's even more impressive.
Les, I'd like to ask you about Marcus Williams. I was a little bit down on him early in the season, missed some tackles, wasn't really playing that quote-unquote free safety. He's come on now in the latter part of the season. A pick six last week. He's playing a true center field. Maybe he's gotten that monkey off his back from the Minnesota Miracle, because he seems to be much more confident in the defensive backfield right now.
Yeah, I think he's done a good job. He had some rough spots early this season, and I think he's kind of put that behind him. He does need to thank Jameis Winston and his receiver.
Yes.
I don't know whose fault it was, but obviously it was a miscommunication on his interception. But he was in the right place at the right time, and he's done that several times this year. And I think that's what he's doing now is what he was noted for when they drafted him at Utah. He was a ball hawk.
Yes.
He made interceptions. He was around the ball. He caused and recovered fumbles. And that's what you need from a free safety, is somebody who can help create turnovers, especially with interceptions. So he's come on. I think over the last month or so, you would have to say his play has gotten significantly better than where it was earlier in the year. And if he can play that way on a consistent basis, like he did for much of his rookie season, he's a really good player. He took a step back last year, probably the experience in Minnesota had something to do with that, and it may have even lingered into early this year. But right now he's playing very well, what they expected him to be when they brought him here, and he's a valuable player right now.
And I think it's important to know who you are. Mentioning his time at Utah, in that particular defense, he was a true center fielder. And you can make plays that way, but your primary responsibility is as a free safety in a traditional defense. Don't let anybody get behind you. So playing further back, seeing the game in front of him, and if you're in position all the time, like what happened in Tampa, you'll be in the right spot at the right time every once in a while to come up with a turnover. So he's figured that out, and his partnership with Von Bell is clearly a big reason why. Once Bell came into the fold and started playing well last season, we saw Williams get better as last year went along. This year, the Saints, just for whatever reason, they start slowly in general. But once these guys figured out, hey, we know our roles here, and we're an experienced secondary with one another, we saw them settle in and play really well. So we shouldn't be surprised, because we know the tandem back there works really well, and it's one the Saints really need to keep together for a few years if they can.
I'll tell you what, you're reading my mind, because this is where I'm going next. Von Bell, Eli Apple, both contracts are up this year. When you look at where the secondary is playing right now, you hope that you can bring them both back. You hope that both guys won't outprice themselves coming back as well.
Right, and you wonder a little bit more about Apple because of the price situation. A solid starting corner. He's finally got the respect of being one of those in the NFL. He's not a true number one, but he's somebody that could start for a lot of teams in the league. So he may get overpaid out there somewhere, but we'll see how much he and his agent, of course he's really close to his mother who's taken care of him and tried to help him make the right decisions in his career and off the field. Maybe they realize that this is the right place for him, and you can get a long-term contract at a reasonable deal. Now Bell, because he's much more of a traditional strong safety, I think his market will be a little bit more reasonable, and I expect at this point that both will be re-signed, because we know what a good job the Saints do with their cap room, and they have plenty moving forward.
Yeah. Thoughts?
Yeah, I tend to think that they will both be back unless somebody out there just overpays for them, and all it takes is one team to do that. I think that's probably not going to happen. I think Von Bell is probably the most improved player on the team this year. He was improved last year,
Yes.
but he is much improved this year. They went out, they drafted C.J. Gardner-Johnson and Saquon Hampton as insurance
Yes.
in case they weren't able to re-sign Bell, and certainly Gardner-Johnson is a keeper. He has shown himself during the regular season. Hampton had a good training camp, has not played as much during the regular season, so they have options there with some young players, but I think the way Bell has played this year, he has proven to them that he's a valuable person in this defense and they need to keep him. And Eli Apple, I think we all expected, would benefit from having an offseason in the defense, and I think that's been the case.
I will add this. When we talk about potential overpays in the NFL, that tends to happen within a division. And we know Atlanta and especially Tampa Bay have had
Yes.
problems on the back end. So keep an eye on Eli Apple. If he does wind up leaving for money that looks a little bit unreasonable versus what you think he would deserve,
Right.
don't be surprised if it's a rival in the
Right,
South.
and of course that always works out because again you're hopefully you're helping yourself, but you're also again hurting the team that's in your division as well. Guys, let's talk a little bit about the offense. I mentioned Nick Easton. I want you guys to talk about the offensive line. They played they played horribly against Atlanta. They come back. They played very, very well against Tampa. Also, the Saints ran the ball, which again something they abandoned the run or they just didn't run the ball. They ran the ball 11 times against Atlanta. They had 28 runs for 109 yards against Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Finally, Kamara gets 23 touches. I think he had like 11 touches in the game against Atlanta. Still Michael Thomas is Michael Thomas. Looks like the best wide receiver on the planet. Going forward, I'm wondering what they're going to do offensively in terms of Kirkwood coming back, adding another pass catcher here. Again, looked pretty good last week. And oh, by the way, again, Cook continues to get better within this offense with Breeze, who had 3 touchdown passes last week.
I don't want to be the bad guy, but when it comes to Andrews Pete, if you believe in sites like Pro Football Focus and you just use your own 2 eyes, I don't necessarily think as he's a pending free agent that he's been playing tremendous football this season. And I think there were some issues last year as well. So I'm not surprised that somebody was able to step in and keep that unit whole and to have success. But I think we should be surprised that Nick Easton did, even though he was a big ticket free agent because he wasn't even active
was
on
MIA
Sundays.
all year.
So it's good that he was able to step in because that's what he was supposed to be able to do. If you had interior offensive line issues at center or guard, he's proven there when he's healthy to be at least decent, and he played really well. I think the bigger picture of that game and how it's going to help the Saints move forward when you talk about being able to run the ball, 28 carries, 109, it's not that impressive, but Tampa Bay has an excellent run defense. Their problems are all on the back end, and the Saints stuck with it. It helped that they had the early lead, but they knew it was important to get the ball in the hands of Kamara. They mixed in Murray well, and he had to deal with the hard yards between the tackles against that good front seven. So again, the game plan, really good on the defensive side. Same thing for the offensive side of the ball as well, because you got Jared Cook involved, Ted Ginn with a touchdown catch. Everybody stepped up and did their part throughout the offense that you needed to be able to win a game on the road like that.
Yeah, the only thing I would like to see is single digits for Murray in terms of running the football. I'd like to see him get a little bit more carries than when he got against Tampa Bay. Again, that's probably going to go within the flow of the game as well. Your thoughts on the offense?
Yeah, well, I think there were 2 things. Nick Easton certainly was a big part of their success. I think they decided coming out of that game against Atlanta that they were better off Will Clapp being a young player they've been using in the jumbo package as essentially an extra tight end. They didn't want to put too much on his plate. Maybe they didn't see everything they wanted to see when he was in there against Atlanta, and they felt you just focus on the role you have right now. We'll put a more experienced player in there for Andrews Pete, and this is why they signed Nick Easton, and he did exactly what they had hoped he would do. It was a very good performance by him. I think there were 2 major factors in the improved run game. One was time of possession, and that's sort of a chicken and egg thing. The time of possession gets better when you're able to run the ball. Atlanta kept the ball away from them a week earlier. And then it was obvious Alvin Kamara is much healthier than he was a week earlier.
Yes.
And he just looked a lot better. You could see it on the punt. One of those punt returns, you could just see the burst was there, and it wasn't there a week earlier against Atlanta. So I think they're figuring out how they can balance Kamara and Murray and use those 2 different packages well and fit that into the game plan. You're seeing the identity come to the forefront now. It's going to be Michael Thomas because nobody can guard him, and Kamara in the passing game first, running game second, Murray filling in, and then Jared Cook being the other receiver. If Keith Kirkwood comes in and adds something, well, that would be nice. But I think that is your offense right there. Those four guys with Kamara and Cook filling the role that no other receiver has been able to fill behind Michael Thomas.
And Kirkwood could be somebody that helps in the red zone in particular because we know Cook has to be a big target there. Everybody's going to have their attention on Thomas. So him coming off of IR and having a chance to contribute, he's going to be competing with somebody in Traquan Smith that's still questionable in several ways. So that competition will continue as to who gets the snaps once we get to the postseason that really matter the most.
Yep. Guys, Carolina coming up. The Saints can still wrap up the division by Thanksgiving night against Atlanta. What do the Saints have to look for into the Carolina Panthers?
Well, the Panthers are a struggling football team all of a sudden, and it's happening because Kyle Allen is a quarterback who is starting to be exposed. The more you see him, the more you realize that long-term first-string quarterback may not be in his future. He's one that if you put a little pressure on him, if you put the game on his shoulders when they fall behind early, he's prone to make mistakes and really bad ones. The 4 interceptions against Atlanta, most of those were simply poor decisions. So when you play a team like Carolina, they're so centered on one player. Christian McCaffrey's having an amazing season, and he should be in the MVP discussion because they wouldn't be anywhere close to 500 if he hasn't been as good as he's been doing everything for that offense. Look, the Saints know what they have to do to stop that team, and if they win up front, Carolina's going to have a hard time even staying in it in the Dome because I think the Saints we saw before the bye are back.
Right. Carolina?
Well, I mean, it's all about Christian McCaffrey. I mean, he's carried that team. He's on pace, I think, to set an all-time NFL record for yards from scrimmage. He already has over 1,000 rushing. But they've had, even with his success, they've had some injuries in the offensive line, and that showed up in pass protection last week. Allen was under a lot of duress, did not handle it well. I think 3 of those interceptions came in the end zone, which you just cannot have. And so they have problems at quarterback. Also, there's a lot of film on him now. They didn't have that early in the year because he hadn't played much except in Week 17 against the Saints last year. So I think defenses are starting to figure out how they can get to him and pressure him, and the offensive line problems they've had have contributed to that. So unless Christian McCaffrey is just unstoppable, and I think the Saints defense is too good to allow him to dominate this game, it's going to be really hard for Carolina to stay with the Saints. And their defense isn't playing that well, even though it's been a good defense in recent years. And so I just think this is a bad matchup for the Panthers.
And Les made a really good point about Allen with the end zone interceptions. He had a critical one at Green Bay when they were in that game the week before that. The thing is, they struggle in the red zone at times now because they don't have Cam Newton in that power running game. As good as McCaffrey has been in the season he's having, he's not somebody you're just going to line up and power your way through. So they've struggled against better defenses or defenses like Atlanta that's suddenly better and playing well in the red zone. So if you don't give up the explosive play to guys like DJ Moore, they have speed at receiver, and you make Carolina move the ball down the field, sort of like Jameis Winston, chances are you're going to turn them over a few times.
Yep. Let's shift gears before we grab a break and hear from our underwriters. Tua gets injured on Saturday against Mississippi State. A lot of criticism of Nick Saban for having him in, having the lead. What's your take on that, Jude?
Well, it's not the first time he's done this with a quarterback, and he did it with a quarterback at LSU that didn't have injury problems. Go back to 2002 with Matt Mock.
Yes.
That season was derailed because he was injured running the football and a designed running play in the early fourth quarter, I believe it was, of a blowout win at Florida, and LSU's championship hopes in the SEC died because of that. But to do it here with Tua, when you have a big enough lead and you know you're going to win the football game, they should have gotten him out of there before that and not waited till halftime. Here's a guy who's still healing, trying to recover from his most recent injury, an injury-prone quarterback with a bright NFL future. There was no reason in the world not to protect him except maybe one thing, and that's why Saban should be questioned. They're chasing that final playoff spot at the time and wanting to get style points. Yes. I think that's what it was all about, and he's risked this young man's future because of that. They say he'll make a full recovery, but this is a hip injury to go on top of other lower leg injuries. We don't know that for sure. We don't know if he's the same guy, and it may cost him a lot of money in the draft. It may cost his future if he doesn't heal up right. So Nick Saban deserves to be on the chopping block for this.
Right.
Well, I'm going to take a slightly different approach to that. First of all, I think Tua's got to think about coming back for another year and proving he's healthy, not going into the NFL
I've asked that
draft,
same question.
because he's not going to be able to demonstrate himself in the combine or any workouts prior to the draft. But that's another issue. This, hindsight's 2020. Yeah, maybe they shouldn't have played Tua at all. They could have beaten Mississippi State without playing Tua, but they wanted style points. They wanted to put their best foot forward, bounce back from LSU, win impressively. You put him in there, at what point do you pull him? Halftime is a logical time to make a change like that, because you can sit down with the backup quarterback, you can adjust your game plan, you have time to get ready for a change at the quarterback position. If he doesn't get hurt, nobody's saying he should have gone out at that particular moment in the game. It's because he got hurt. They were probably going to pull him at halftime. I don't have a problem with that. It's always difficult to identify precisely the right moment to pull someone. Coaches have seen enough leads evaporate over the years that they aren't too quick to pull their best player, because they don't want the other team back into the game and maybe lose the momentum you have. So I don't necessarily say he shouldn't have been in at that point. If you're going to start him and play him, I don't have a problem with them playing him through the first half, even with the big lead.
It was my understanding that they weren't 100% sure or making it public that they were definitely going to start him to begin with. So there were still concerns there.
Right.
And you had a 35-7 lead over an overmatched Mississippi State team. You knew the situation. I wonder, was there even a discussion to say, Tua, we're going to leave you into the game for another drive here. Don't scramble. Get rid of the ball if it's not there. We don't want to risk anything. Because I think if he'd have been told that, he wouldn't have moved. So I wonder what's really going on behind the scenes there. And I don't think Saban really cared. I just think he wanted more points. Look, he's a cutthroat coach, one of the greatest of all time, if not the greatest college football coach ever. But I don't think his quarterback's best interests were taken into account there. And if I were Tua, I would go pro. I have film, okay? I have records in college football. I've done many tremendous things. I'm going to go with we're going to heal up, we're going to be fine. Somebody's going to take him in the first round. And hey, it might be best for him because he might wind up middle of the first round or later in the first round with a better football team.
I'll give you a quick prediction here. Tua goes into the draft. Most of the bad teams in the NFL are scared off because they haven't been able to see him thoroughly examined because of the recuperation. And at some point, Bill Belichick drafts him, and he's his successor to Tom Brady a year or two down the road.
Could we throw the New Orleans Saints in there as well?
I was about to.
I would say the Saints are the same type of organization that might do the same thing.
We'll hear the Saints' name come up if he starts falling down the board because we heard it with Patrick Mahomes, and maybe this would be a completely different show and a completely different franchise if Marcus Lattimore weren't the choice because Mahomes was taken by a team trading
you're
up.
probably forcing Breeze out the door.
Right, and Lamar Jackson's name came up. People thought when the Saints traded up in the draft a couple of years ago, it was for Jackson. It wound up not being. It was for Davenport. But we know there must have been some interest from Peyton, or there wouldn't have been that much smoke around it. I mean, Tua's another one of those modern quarterbacks. I don't know how much you want him running, but he has a special arm and a special ability to change games if he's healthy. And I could see Sean Payton wanting to play with that new toy.
Right, and it gives Breeze maybe a 2-year window, okay, to be able to play for a couple more seasons. Tua, much like we've seen even Bridgewater kind of learn under Breeze. Again, how he prepares himself. We've heard him talk over and over again, accolades on following what Breeze has done. See other quarterbacks trying to do the same thing, but learning this offense maybe under the tutelage of Breeze, and then Breeze goes to the sunset when he's ready, maybe in a couple seasons. Wishful thinking. I know there's a lot of even LSU fans out there that are thinking right now, if Tua falls, Saints need to go get him.
Right.
Because especially now with looking like Joe Burrow is going to be a top 5 pick.
Yeah.
I think number 1 overall at this point. I mean, he's going to potentially be the biggest Heisman winner of all time, the biggest blowout winner. He might break O.J. Simpson's record, which, I mean, we're talking decades here. And because the Bengals right now are in such good position to be number 1 overall, and he's an Ohio kid, put 2 and 2 together.
Yeah, no doubt about it. We're going to take a break. We come back. We'll switch to LSU. We'll talk about the college football playoff rankings as well, and then we'll get into some Tulane and Pelicans. Our guest tonight, Les East, award-winning journalist, along with Jude Young, the voice of the Privateers, both guys from CrescentCitySports.com. I'm your host, Eric Asher. We'll be right back.
Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration has been family-owned and operated since 1989. Burkhardt has energy-efficient solutions and offers brands such as Mitsubishi ductless AC units and Amana, the only manufacturer with a lifetime unit replacement warranty. Burkhardt's offers maintenance bundle packages that include servicing your AC, generator, and tankless water heater. For more information on the services Burkhardt's provides, visit acpromise.com. Burkhardt's Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration, providing comfort for life.
Located at 3701 Iberville Street in Mid-City is Katie's Restaurant and Bar. Open 7 days a week, Katie's offers daily specials for lunch, dinner, and Sunday brunch. Serving New Orleans cuisine such as fried shrimp platters, grilled redfish, and a fully stocked bar. And don't forget about our expanded event seating and local entertainment. Featured on the Best of Food Network's diners, drive-ins, and dives, Katie's Restaurant and Bar.
Welcome back to Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Tonight, Les East and also Jude Young, award-winning journalist Les East, with us tonight.
And award of the state.
Award of the state of Hawaii within the next couple of days. We'll say that. How's that? Guys, let's talk a little bit about the rankings. They stay the same this week. LSU number 1, Ohio State number 2, Clemson is 3rd, Georgia is 4th, Alabama stays at 5th despite the Tua injury, which was expected in my opinion, and then Oregon in the 6th spot right now. The question kind of centers around LSU because they have Arkansas and A&M over the next 2 weeks. Meanwhile, Ohio State has Penn State and Michigan over the next 2 weeks. We've heard eye test all season long, okay? Eye test, maybe overriding the strength of schedule. Now, I'm one, and some people don't agree, that believes that you have to take each game as they come on the schedule in a vacuum. What was that team? How good was that team when you played them? How strong was that team when you played them? How injured or healthy was that team when you played them? And where were they ranked when you played them? You know, you can't help if ultimately something like happens with Alabama where they lose a Tua, all of a sudden they start to drop. What happened with the University of Texas where they were fairly healthy in the beginning of the season? They get some injuries. After the Oklahoma game, they start to really drop. Now again, they don't even mention when it comes to the college football playoff rankings at this point. When you look at Ohio State, they're in a good position now because of having the ability to play 2 top Big Ten teams, Penn State and Michigan. Some could say they're overrated. They are what they are right now in terms of the college football playoffs. But without LSU maybe putting up big-time scoring numbers against A&M and also Arkansas, there's a chance they could slip to number 2. Now, there are some LSU fans that would like to see them at number 2 because of the matchup when you get into the college football playoffs and where you'll be playing. But, I mean, I'm sure that the team, and I'm sure most people out there that are in Louisiana follow LSU, believe they're the best team in the country. I do. I'd like to get your guys' take on that.
Well, we shouldn't be surprised that this situation is coming up because it's not the BCS era. We don't have a formula. Mm-hmm. There is no formula. We're going to pick from here and there, eye test and statistics and schedule, quality wins, everything that come into it. In this particular case, I understand why Ohio State's getting some love as the potential team to leapfrog LSU because, yeah, maybe Michigan and Penn State are a little bit overrated, but they're very good football teams. They're very talented teams. And if Ohio State can win and win impressively against both of them, and keep in mind the last few years against Penn State, there have been very close games no matter where these teams have been in the polls. I think a lot of folks are expecting a blowout. If there's not, don't be surprised. But if there is, that'll be another piece of the argument for Ohio State. And you mentioned 2 quality Big Ten teams. In their championship game, they will play a third, whether it's Wisconsin or potentially an 11-1 Minnesota team that was very close to being 12-0. So they're going to have their chance. And if they do so with a complete effort, because their argument is we're the most complete team. And a lot of people are starting to agree with that because their defense has been solid where LSU's has shown cracks. If they're dominant in these games, they may win that argument even if LSU does impress at home in the 2 regular season games to wrap it up. And no matter how they beat Georgia, again, it's going to come up to opinion of those people in the room. But Ohio State does have a fair chance and a reasonable chance to leap LSU, and you can argue that it might be the right decision.
Well, I think that is possible. You have to see how these games play out. But Ohio State's schedule is starting to catch up with LSU's schedule. LSU's already beaten 4 top 10 teams. Well, now Ohio State, which has a blowout win over Wisconsin, which at times has looked like a CFP contender,
Yes.
and at times it looked like an average team. But at the time they played them, they were looking pretty good. Now they get Penn State and Michigan. Michigan is one of the most improved teams in the country over the last few weeks. They're a good team. They seem to be perennially overestimated.
Agreed.
But right now they're playing very good football. Penn State's a good team. So if they win both those games and are very impressive in all facets in doing so, you can definitely make a good case for them jumping over LSU. We'll see how LSU does. Arkansas is not really going to be a gauge of
Right.
where LSU's at. A&M is not a bad team. That we'll see. If LSU puts up 50 on Texas A&M, that'll be worth factoring into the equation. But it's a very close case, I think, between those two. And because of the two teams they're going to be playing coming up, even before the Big Ten championship, I think Ohio State rightfully has an opportunity to pass LSU if it takes care of business. We'll see what they do.
And we should mention why it's important, because you have 3 undefeated teams, the third being the defending national champions, Clemson. Somebody's going to have to go through 2 of the 3 to win a national championship. The team that's number 1 doesn't have to.
Right.
So that's why it's so important, and I think LSU needs to understand that and focus on playing the best, most complete game they can for 4 quarters, no matter what the situation is. Don't fall asleep at the wheel against Ole Miss and have a bad second half, because it will be held against you. I think they fully understand that now.
Let's talk about that win, 58-37 over Ole Miss. Tigers are now 10-0. They surrendered 624 yards against the Rebels. 44 runs, 402 yards on the ground. Plumlee was 21 completions for 212 yards, 4 touchdowns for the freshman. I'll take you first, Les. How bad is this defense? Because, again, there have been times where they played pretty well. But, again, there have been times when they played down to their competition as well. First half against Northwestern, Vanderbilt ran all over them. We saw that again against Ole Miss this week. A lot of it, again, to me, is discipline. Gap discipline, not wrapping up on tackles. You go right through the litany of problems that they're having right now. They seem to be mass confusion before the snap, constantly seeing guys trying to get guys in position. The adjustments, maybe not as smooth as we've seen in the past with Dave Aranda, and wondering if that's a byproduct of the players that they have on the field. This may not be the most talented LSU defense, but they're not doing the fundamentals correctly either, in my opinion.
No, they're not. They're a pretty good defense that at times has been a very good defense and at times has been a very bad defense. I think there are a lot of factors here. I think injuries were a big part of it early on. They've gotten healthier up front. I don't think Grant Delpit is 100%. I think his injury is a factor. I think the quickness with which the offense scores points and forces them to go back on the field, I think, has been a factor, especially early in the year before they got used to it. I think having to practice against that offense and not being as physical in their practices has hurt their tackling and not made them as good up front as they've been in the past. I think all of those things are a factor. I don't think Dave Aranda has done as good a job as he's done in the past. He's not forgotten how to coach. So I don't think it's fire Dave Aranda time by any means. But Saturday was a good example. Rich Rodriguez is an outstanding offensive coach. I think they made changes at halftime. They went to the option game more. Ed Orgeron took responsibility for the first defensive call at the start of the third quarter, and they allowed the big run there. And I don't think they ever adjusted to what Ole Miss was doing as well as they could have. Some of that is on individual players. They had the wrong fits. All it takes is one breakdown sometimes for everybody to look bad. So I think there are a lot of different factors that have gone into it, but there's something missing there with this coordinator and this amount of talent, an offense that gets teams down so big, so quickly. All of that should lead to better, more consistent defensive play than they have had. And for all those factors I just threw in there, I don't think that fully explains it. I think there's an X factor in there that I can't put my finger on, but something's missing.
Can you put your finger on the X factor?
First, I want to say, when you make the excuse that, well, our team's scoring too fast on offense and it's hurting the defense, that's an excuse made by teams with bad defenses. So you have to throw that out the window. When you're not playing assignment football, when you're giving up big plays against teams like Auburn, who had a couple huge runs, total breakdowns, that had no passing game, and you do it against Ole Miss, who virtually had no passing game and wound up giving 400 yards, and you're also on the flip side against Alabama, confusion before the snap, getting quick snapped and giving up bombs for touchdowns, protecting a 2-score lead at the very end of the game, giving up a bomb for a touchdown. When you're doing it against both styles of teams and their strengths are killing you, you have to wonder what's going on here. You have to question it. So if you talk about X factor, what's the main reason? Well, I don't think LSU has too many, considering Delpit, who I think even before he was banged up against Auburn, wasn't playing like a number 1 pick like we heard he was. I don't think they have dudes out there. I don't think they have difference makers, all-American, all-SEC caliber guys. So that makes it even more important that they play assignment football. And that includes the injuries and the toll they've taken on Rashard Lawrence and Glenn Logan, who were supposed to be the 2 talented difference makers up front. And I think we saw with Chasson that he's more of a complete linebacker than he is the threat off the edge that he was expected to be. So nobody's playing the roles that they were expected to play, and you don't have anybody playing elite football on the defense outside of the corners when they're healthy. So you've got a lot of problems there, and guys have to be in the right spot and not make the big error. Make teams have to prove it and drive the ball down the field. If they're not doing that, you have to question the coaching, because at some point, what's going on with the preparation? Tackling, not doing that in practice is one thing, but you're in the film room and you're on the field. Everybody should know where they're supposed to be and not blow it, especially against teams that are one-dimensional, and you pretty much know a tweak here, a tweak there, and an in-game adjustment, what's coming. LSU hasn't done that, and it's highly questionable, and there's a guy making $2.5 million a year who's the head coach of the defense who should be doing a better job, period.
You know, when I was watching that Ole Miss game, I had a flashback to 2011 West Virginia, 4th game of the season. LSU won the game, ascended to number 1 in the poll after that game. Gave up 533 yards or something to Geno Smith and Tavon Austin. It was a game LSU had command of early on, and West Virginia, I think, ran a kickback or something, and they hit a big play on offense, and it just started snowballing on them, and it looked like the worst LSU defense. And coming out of that game, the concern was, what is wrong with John Chavis? How can LSU compete for a national championship with this defense? Now, that's happened a lot more with this defense than just one game with that defense. But sometimes things get away from you like that. I agree, the coaching has not been up to what it's been in the past. But I just think this is a complex problem that has a lot of factors in it, and you can't just say Dave Aranda's not doing his job, he's not earning his money, he forgot how to coach or whatever. The coaches and the players share in this, and there are other factors there. I just don't think there's a simple black and white explanation for the problems they have.
But there's the same Dave Aranda who even admitted that he had to adjust the way he coaches to the changes in college football, and it seems like there's some issue there because we're having all these problems, not only against the one-dimensional teams, but Florida marched up and down the field for 4 quarters against LSU. Not a dynamic offense, but they moved the ball into the red zone a couple more times in the 4th quarter. So basically 3 out of the 4 quarters, they put long sustained drives together when they weren't even winning field position, and they could have easily matched LSU on the scoreboard if they'd have completed a couple of drives. Yes, LSU got the stops, but that's an average offense at best that struggled at places like Missouri to be able to do that, winning over 4 quarters, but not constantly moving the ball up and down the field. Again, I have to throw these questions out there because I feel like you have to put LSU on the spot and say, all right, now you should dominate Arkansas. And it should be a focused effort to totally annihilate them and shut them down offensively. It's a bad football team with an interim coach. Then against Texas A&M, Kellen Mond tore him up last year in College Station. He can do it again because he's a dual threat, more of a passer than a runner, but he can run. LSU needs to be preparing for that right now because Arkansas isn't as much of a challenge. Because again, they need to hold on to the #1 overall ranking. Their goal, like Coach Orgeron said after the Alabama win, is bigger than beating Alabama. It's to win the national championship. Well, they're going to have to play complete football to keep teams like Ohio State from taking that #1 spot if they want to be champions. And it's all on this defense, because I know the offense is going to show
It's
up.
coming to the offense. 714 yards against Ole Miss. Burrow was Burrow. Again, NFL wide receivers in both Chase and Jefferson. And as I've mentioned, the biggest surprise to me all season long has been the play of Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who has proven he is an SEC back. Your thoughts on the offense? I mean, really hitting on all cylinders right now.
Well, it is, and this is with an offensive line that has not been elite.
Right.
They've done a nice job.
Yes.
They've been a little bit
That's
inconsistent.
true.
They've had
And
to
they were
move a
injured
lot of
last week.
pieces around,
Big
and
time.
they've done a good job in a lot of games. But, if they had an elite offensive line playing that way week in and week out, I can't imagine what the numbers would be. Clyde Edwards-Helaire has been a revelation, no question about it. That game he had against Alabama was off the charts. But here's the thing about Joe Burrow. Well, two things. One is, if LSU makes it to the CFP championship game, they have 5 games left, which means they have a third of their season left. Just think about what those numbers are going to look like if he gets 5 more games, even though they're going to be playing really good teams at the end. The other thing is, he's breaking all of these cumulative records, yards and touchdowns, and at the same time, he's going to set an NCAA record for completion percentage. They ask him to do more and more and more and more, and the efficiency never drops off the slightest amount. 78% completion percentage. To me, that's the most remarkable thing, is that he can pile up all those numbers and not ever lose his efficiency, although he did have 2 interceptions the other day.
And those were, that just showed he was human, right?
Right.
I mean, really.
He had
2 interceptions in 3 minutes.
4 for the whole season before that. So.
Yeah, and that's part of it. You can argue for the whole team in the second half. It was 31-7 at halftime. It felt like the game was in the bag.
Yes.
The trap game had been avoided, and I think that affected even Joe Burrow. But getting back to the whole offense and its whole success, look, Joe Burrow is incredibly special. And he's so special in a way that find the weaknesses. You can't. He's plenty mobile enough. He's fearless, knows how to step up in the pocket under pressure. It doesn't bother him. He's smart pre-snap. He's got touch. He's made the work on his mechanics that he can make every throw. The only thing you can say is maybe he doesn't have a cannon like a Tua, for example, but you don't need one. Ask Tom Brady, ask Drew
Accuracy
Brees.
is what it
He's
comes down
in
to.
that category is what he's been able to do this year, and there's no reason to think it won't translate to the next level. But what you said about Clyde Edwards-Helaire and how he's played, both of you, there's no question that this team wouldn't be where it is without him, because the young running backs behind him aren't ready, and Edwards-Helaire has made himself a lot of money playing at the next level. He's going to be a valuable running back for a team in the NFL if he stays healthy for a long time, and that's what we were looking at mid-season. Once the best teams on the schedule come up, will this LSU offense have balance? And they've had it because Edwards-Helaire constantly makes the first guy miss. The offensive line can be patchwork and deal with suspensions and injuries because the offense has everybody else playing at such an elite level. It makes their lives much easier.
Yeah. Guys, let's shift to the Riverbell Classic, Nichols versus Southeastern. It has playoff ramifications. The winner gets the automatic bye to the playoffs. You guys had them at the quarterback club this weekend. Those coach this week. Talk a little bit about this game, which is an important game in the state this weekend.
There's no doubt about it, because a spot in the NCAA playoffs on the line, a conference championship, what Nichols has been building up from a winless team under Tim Rebo over 5 years, that's the same blueprint that Southeastern decided to follow after Ron Roberts went to go fix the Raging Cajuns defense and be their coordinator. He had taken the program as far as he thought he could go, used a lot of transfers and going all around the South and even the country to do it. You bring in a Frank Selfa who's a lot like Rebo, Louisiana guy, lots of connections in the high schools, knowing how to get that next level guy, the best he can get his hands on, and mix in a few transfers here and there. So he's in just year 2 and able to do this. He's basically following the same blueprint because they're both from the same background. When Les and I saw them at the quarterback club, they were buddy-buddy, they were joking with each other. It was a mutual admiration society. You have 2 very similar programs, but I think in this game the difference has to be, it's hard to make up from the season before when it was 44-0, even though Southeastern's a much better team and they're surging right now. A senior quarterback in Chase Forkade, I would guess he winds up being the difference maker in the matchup, but I also wouldn't be surprised if Southeastern wins the game because they've gotten so good so fast.
Your thoughts?
And one of the funny things at the quarterback club was Frank accused him of running the score up on him last year because Nichols did win by so much, but I think that's kind of what you said is kind of the larger point, is that there was a pretty big gap between the two last year. Obviously, Southeastern has closed that gap. Have they done it enough to win this game with these stakes? Being at home, maybe. I'm not sure they're going to be able to do it. I'm not sure they've caught up to him at this point, especially with an experienced quarterback like Chase Forkay. But the best part of this is that these are two programs that have been built with Louisiana players, and players who aren't big enough or strong enough or fast enough to go to LSU or Alabama or something are able to compete at a high level in their home state against people they know from their home state. I just think it's great for football in Louisiana.
And there's plenty of talent to go along, because when McNeese has been good, they've been using East Texas kids and kids from that part of the state, but also sprinkled around, and they're rebuilding as well, and they've gotten better this season under a new coach. And then we look at Louisiana Tech before the suspension of their quarterback. They were at the top of Conference USA. And we look at UL Lafayette, only Appalachian State in their way of being at the top of the Sun Belt. Tulane, what they're doing. LSU, what they're doing. There's plenty of talent in Louisiana. It's making a lot of programs in the state very successful.
Yeah, I would agree. Let's go to Tulane, 6-4, 3-3 now in the American Athletic Conference. I thought they'd take the next step against Temple. They were out-physicaled, but more importantly, again, it's the thing that blows my mind about Tulane right now is an undisciplined team. You know, the penalties, the turnovers. Again, you look at look, the win was a factor at the Link. There's no doubt about it. Even Wentz, Wentz and Brady had problems on Sunday, but this team beats itself.
And they beat themselves on the road in particular. They haven't gotten to that step of being a true contender in the American because they can't go on the road and even start off well. They were terrible early at Navy, almost came back to win, couldn't do it. They were awful before that against Memphis, biggest game of the season. They couldn't even compete in the Liberty Bowl, and then they do it here against Temple. Look, if you're going to compete with these teams in the league, you got to win home and away, and they're not there yet. And I think what people keep bringing up from a Tulane perspective is looking at LSU and looking at their own past. We need to find that guy at quarterback, that leader that takes us to the next level, so we don't get off to bad starts, where we take advantage of our talent. Justin McMillan has been an upgrade from Jonathan Banks, but they're not there yet. A Tulane that's recruiting this well may be able to get away with just the next step up at quarterback. Maybe it's Keon Howard, the transfer from USM, who would be next in line. But they're close. That's the point. You can turn that around really quickly once you have the right guy at quarterback who's the right combination of leader and playmaker. They don't have it yet, and that's why they're not getting it done away from home.
Your thoughts on Tulane?
Well, to me, this whole season was all about getting to a bowl game for a second consecutive season. That would signify progress in the program. They had such a good start against a backloaded schedule. They took advantage of a somewhat weaker first half schedule, and it looked like they may be headed to 7 or 8 wins. They could still get to 8, but it's unlikely with the opponents they have. And so now it seems more disappointing than maybe it should because they had such a fast start. But it looks like the improvement from last year is incremental at this point. They're not at a much higher level than they were after last year. And if they lose these next 2, they're not guaranteed of a bowl bid. You know, they're going to need some help because there are going to be a lot of 6-6 teams, and that would be a huge disappointment if they didn't get into a bowl game. But I think whether they win one or both of these last games or don't, if they get back to a bowl game and preferably win the bowl game, then it's a satisfactory next step. But this is it takes a while to rebuild a program like Tulane. They've done a nice job to this point, but it's going to be a slow, steady ascension.
To me, it's the self-inflicted wounds. They'd be so much better off if they weren't keep beating themselves because they're in these games. They go down 20-7 to Temple. They come back. You know, again, 6 penalties, 51 yards. But when the penalties happen, the turnovers. That's been the theme of the season, unfortunately. I want to get to the Pelicans with just the time that we have left. 5-9 now. They've won 4 of their last 6. I was really down on the way they were playing early and rightly so. What we've seen out of these backups, and look, first of all, I want to say this. I don't want to hear anybody in the NBA talk about losing stars or not playing stars or load management. Ingram, Hart, Ball, Okafor, Zion, Jackson, all out. Favors out. Oh, you're talking about guys who in your starting lineup will be the first guys off the bench. They're playing basically again with a couple starters in Redick and also Drew Holiday, Ingram when he's healthy, and the rest of these guys we're going to be bench warmers or close to the G League. What they're doing. What's been impressive to me, and I'll get to you guys quickly, is again, finally starting to play some team defense. Finally starting to hit the boards. They're still chucking up the threes now, but again, they're moving the basketball a little bit better over these last few games, and it's turned into wins for this team. They're playing the type of basketball the right way, so that you can win consistently. Now, we'll see how they do on this road swing, but you got to like what you've seen out of them over the last few games.
And there's two parts of it. First, change the names, and it sounds like the start of virtually every Pelican season, particularly under Alvin Gentry. Well, there were the injuries, and it's a really slow start, but then they started to get their acts together after 2 or 3 weeks. I mean, we've heard this before.
No doubt.
But this case is special because they have so many newcomers, and then the injuries, especially to Zion and veterans, happen. That makes it harder. And when you bring in so many different guys together, many of them young, not used to playing with each other, no matter what part of the career that they're in, then what lags behind when you're trying to be the team that plays at the highest pace in the league? It winds up being defense and to a lesser extent rebounding when you go to a lot of the smaller lineups. So they're adjusting on the fly. They're getting better. And I think when you look at this season, it was always about, especially the young guys, whether it's, do we have a star in Brandon Ingram? Maybe we do, and maybe you can retain him and move forward with him or not. You're starting to find out that he's better than a lot of folks were giving him credit for.
I thought he was.
Those draft picks that aren't Zion, they're showing the type of talent, getting their opportunity, that they're people you can build with. So there are a lot of good things here going on, and squeezing into the playoffs at the end would have been nice, but as long as they continue to progress, especially once Zion's in the mix, the season to me is a win, because this is about building something long term.
Well, I just think and I think that's true. That's what this season's all about. The final record doesn't mean a whole lot as long as it's not a disaster. The difference here, they've won 3 out of 4, 3 straight at home. The difference is they finally got to Drew Holiday and said, look, we spent the entire offseason saying this is your team to try and take pressure off of Zion Williamson, but forget all that. Just be you. Be the player you've always been.
A great point.
And he's gone back to being who he was, and he's played much better. And J.J. Redick has figured out where the shots are going to come from for him in this offense. So he's getting better shots. He's making them. He's averaging 17 points during this little stretch here. And as nice as these young players are, it's the veterans who are going to hold this thing together and keep it respectable, and that's been Holiday, and that's been Redick, and it's been Derek Favors to a lesser degree when he's been able to play.
Right.
Well, and guys, look, when you could see Jackson Hayes put up a double-double, when you could see Alexander Walker putting up 27 and 19 points on back-to-back games, you're going to live with the growing pains of the fouls and the turnovers, but you're seeing they're getting better. When you're seeing Kendrick Williams, who I would tell anybody, you're going to tell me this guy is a starter in the NBA? No, he's not, but he's a glue guy. He's a guy that does the dirty work. They're finally playing basketball the right way, and I think that's the biggest difference from what we saw early in the season to what we're seeing now. And look, nice little run here. Maybe they get back to 500. You're hoping to be able to tread water till you can get these veterans back.
Valuable minutes in crucial situations for these guys to learn. When we get to the next step, they'll be more ready to fill in around, is this Zion's team? Is it Ingram's team? Is it a combination of the two? Because like you said, Drew Holiday is a key piece, a starter, a leader, but alpha dogs who can score the basketball, they determine how far a team can go.
Got the final word, about 15 seconds.
Well, I just think that this whole season is about seeing what they have going forward that's going to help them get to where they want to be in the future. They're not going to get there this year.
Yeah, I think you're right. I thought they'd be a fringe playoff team. They may still be, but really this is about the entire future of this team. Jude Young, Les East, thanks so much for being with us tonight on Inside New Orleans Sports. Thanks so much for tuning in. Remember, there's a rebroadcast of this program each and every Friday night right here on WLAE-TV at 10 p.m. You can also catch us statewide, Pelican Sports Television, 9 o'clock every Friday night. You can check us out on ericasher.com, where it's always posted on the website. Don't forget, catch me on the radio, Sports 1280, 101.1 FM HD2, and the iHeart Radio app. That's noon to 2 weekdays. Listen live, download the podcast at ericasher.com. All the previous episodes I mentioned of this program also on ericasher.com. Special thanks to our underwriters, also again to Les East and Jude Young, also to the WLE production staff, including Ron Yeager, Jim Dotson, Naila Jones, Alex Chacon, and my director, William Hill. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next week for the Thanksgiving edition of Inside New Orleans Sports. I'm your host, Eric Asher. Have a great week.